It was a quiet evening in the small town of St. Joseph, Minnesota. The date, October 22nd, 1989, the kind of night where the air is crisp but gentle, carrying the last sighs of autumn. Most folks were wrapping up dinner, kids were cozying down for the evening, and scenes of rural tranquility played out behind every window. For the Wetterling family, it seemed like any other Sunday night. Inside the Wetterling household, 11-year-old Jacob, his 10-year-old brother Trevor, and their 12-year-old friend Aaron were a tangle of excitement and nerves. Tonight was special. They'd finally convinced their parents to let them head out after dark to rent a movie at Tom Thumb, the neighborhood convenience store. The boys, 2 on bikes and 1 on a scooter, were living out a rite of passage freedom after sundown for the first time. Jacob, ever vigilant, brought along a flashlight and wore his bright reflective vest, thinking only to be safe. They set out at about 8:30 p.m., laughter echoing behind them. The world felt wide open. Nothing seemed amiss as their wheels traced the familiar path along 91st Avenue. Their destination was a mere 15-minute ride away, and the errand itself took no more than 5 minutes. Movie rented, candy purchased, they started their journey back home, giggling about which treats they'd devour first. But the darkness, so harmless in their minds, hid another presence. Unbeknownst to them, a stranger waited ahead. As the boys passed the driveway of a quiet farm, the Rassier property, everything changed in an instant. A man emerged from the shadows, his outline big and ominous, face obscured, and with chilling authority he barked, "Stop right there, I have a gun, turn off the flashlight, lie down in the ditch and face away." Heartbeats thundered in 3 small chests. The world, seconds before so secure, contracted to a single moment of absolute terror. The boys obeyed, feeling cold mud and twisted roots beneath them. Time splintered as the gunman commanded them to state their ages 10, 11, 12. He seemed to calculate, then abruptly ordered Trevor, the youngest, to run as fast as he could into the darkened cornfields. Aaron and Jacob remained, paralyzed by fear. A heartbeat later, he told Aaron to run too. As Aaron sprinted into the night, heart pounding, he cast a last glance back. Jacob was still on the ground, the man's hand on his shoulder. Neither boy saw what happened next. The abductor and Jacob disappeared. Aaron ran until his lungs burned, the bitter taste of fear clinging to his tongue. When he and Trevor finally regrouped, a wordless look passed between them. Jacob was gone. In that moment, childhood was over. Breathless, shaking, the boys raced the rest of the way home. Trevor burst into the house first, frantic, eyes wide. Their parents, Patty and Jerry Wetterling, weren't home. In mounting panic, Aaron sprinted next door and begged the neighbor to call 911. The call went out at 9:15 p.m. "There's been a kidnapping. An 11-year-old boy, he was taken at gunpoint by a masked man. Please help us." Within minutes, the Stearns County Sheriff's Department dispatched officers to the scene. A tragic urgency electrified the night. Spotlights slashed across ditches, radios crackled as deputies coordinated the first stage of what would become one of Minnesota's largest ever search efforts. When Patty and Jerry arrived, they found chaos sheriffs fanning out, neighbors wandering the road with flashlights, everyone moving with the quiet intensity of people gripped by terror. Patty never forgot the way the air felt, thick and unreal. In the chaos, the boys described the masked man in detail, average height but powerfully built, all dressed in black, threatening and cold. The gun he wielded gleamed faintly in the light. Jacob's bike lay abandoned near the edge of the driveway. Aaron's and Trevor's rides were there too, along with their candy spilled in the grass, a trail of innocence cut short. Worst of all, only 2 sets of smaller footsteps led away from the scene. K-9 units joined the search, noses pressed to the ground, tracing the boys' scent through the fields. They quickly found a set of much larger footprints, heavy and deep, disappearing into the scrub and brush. Not far beyond, tire marks curved away, muddy and fresh, suggesting a getaway car had waited. The implications hit everyone hard. Jacob could be anywhere. Police canvassed the area with single-minded intensity, waking neighbors, checking barns and sheds, even peering into wells, hoping for any sign the boy had escaped. But with every passing hour, hope began to fade. Volunteers, many parents themselves, gathered with lanterns and dogs. Helicopters hovered low, circling with floodlights trained on the rows of corn and stubbled fields. Inside the Wetterling home, the phone rang endlessly, relatives, friends, reporters, and then concerned strangers from across the state. Patty and Jerry stood by, pale and stunned. Patty would later recall, "It was as if a hole had opened in the world. My son was on the other side and I couldn't reach him." Investigators paid careful attention to Aaron and Trevor, quietly setting aside their own emotions so the boys could recount and re-recount every detail. The man's voice echoed in their minds, a harsh whisper, almost mechanical, the way a person sounds when rehearsing terror. He'd said he'd shoot if anyone screamed. They remembered the smell of his jacket, a trace of cigarettes and something sharp, alien. He'd asked their ages. And then, in the flickering dark, only Jacob had been chosen. The timeline came together quickly. The abduction had taken less than 5 minutes. The lag between the incident and the emergency call was barely 10. But those slender hours would prove crucial, forever shifting the odds against bringing Jacob home safe. By sunrise, the story had spread far beyond St. Joseph. Satellite trucks idled on country roads, the faces of missing children beamed out from morning shows, and the first hints of a storm forming around the Wetterling family had begun. As dawn crept through the fields of St. Joseph, fear lingered in the heavy air, settling over the town like a cold fog. Officers who'd searched all night looked drawn and haunted in the first light, their uniforms smeared with mud. But no one was going home. In fact, the sense of urgency only grew. That Monday, the town became headquarters for a mobilization few had ever witnessed. Parents pulled their children from school and tried to answer impossible questions through tears. Volunteers from neighboring towns arrived, wanting only to help. By mid-morning, the church hall pulsed with people signing up for search parties, retirees, college students, off-duty nurses, even local farmers who'd left fields unharvested. Detective Steve Mund was among the first to realize something about this case was different. "This doesn't happen here," he told a local reporter. "We've never had anything like this." But it was clear this was no typical missing child situation. Jacob hadn't just wandered off. An armed abductor, masked and organized, had targeted these boys and taken one under direct threat. The calculated cruelty of the act hung over every conversation. First sketches of the suspect detectives worked closely with Trevor and Aaron. Their description was clear, if not complete. The man had a menacing presence, a deep, unnatural voice. He was thick-set, at least 175 or 180 pounds, maybe more, but quick, and he moved with unsettling confidence. He wore black from head to toe, his face colored over by either a stocking cap or mask. The gun looked like a revolver, and the flashlight he carried glinted off the metal. That voice, "If you scream, I'll kill you." They'd never forget it. Whenever they closed their eyes, they heard it again and again. Police painstakingly reenacted the kidnapping scene, measuring distances, analyzing footprints and tire tracks, and ordering detailed sketches based on Aaron and Trevor's statements. They took tire casts to preserve the imprints. From the type of tread Goodyear it appeared in the distance between tracks, they estimated the vehicle was a mid-sized sedan, likely dark-colored. It had spun in the mud, perhaps hurried, hinting at panic or a rushed escape. But there was trouble in every direction. Dozens of strangers had been in and out of town that weekend. A local Oktoberfest had brought in travelers from across the state. Hotel registers were packed. Campers had parked in makeshift lots. Anyone could have been watching. Anyone could have waited in the shadows. The Wetterlings in shock. Inside the Wetterling home, the day passed in blurs of law enforcement, media, and worried relatives fighting back tears. Patty clung to snippets of hope, her voice never wavering. "Jacob is out there," she told reporters through the haze of exhaustion. "We need him home." Interview after interview unfolded in the kitchen, punctuated by the hum of police radios. Jerry, stoic and private by nature, forced himself to comfort Trevor and Aaron, both racked by worry and guilt. "We ran," Aaron had whispered that morning, but Jacob couldn't. No one blamed them, but the truth left a scar. When the phone rang, Patty rushed for it, praying for Jacob's voice. Instead, there were endless questions. Had Jacob fought back? Had anyone unusual approached the family lately? Were there any strangers or workers, anyone new in town? Patty found herself doubting things that, 24 hours earlier, she would have sworn impossible in St. Joseph. A community turned outward. Throughout the afternoon, St. Joseph transformed. Posters with Jacob's face appeared in every storefront. Residents patrolled their own streets. Children weren't just kept indoors. Parents walked them between houses, suspicious of every parked car and unfamiliar face. At St. Joseph's Catholic Church, the pews swelled with neighbors offering prayers and candles. The mood was equal parts sorrow and combat readiness, a town collectively vowing never again. Veteran investigators quietly admitted to the press that the crime scene had become compromised. Not enough had been roped off after dawn, and well-meaning neighbors and reporters had trampled parts of the ditch and driveway. Potential evidence or even footprints that could have matched the suspects might have been lost forever. By nightfall, every family locked their doors and left front porch lights burning, a silent sign that hope hadn't died. Others paced in their kitchens, helpless, checking the news, waiting for any word about what had happened to Jacob Wetterling. That first full day after Jacob vanished, law enforcement set up a mobile command post right on 91st Avenue, yards from where the flashlights and laughter had turned to a nightmare. The site became a logistical circus of flashing lights, state trooper cruisers, satellite TV vans, and knots of searchers gathering for instructions. Over the scanner, grim voices called for leads, volunteers, and support from outside agencies. For the first time in living memory, St. Joseph felt exposed to the violent randomness of the world. Unraveling fear and the telephone tip line. Soon, the command post's phone rang constantly. Tips, wild theories, and genuine concern poured in. One after another, townspeople described seeing dark vehicles over the weekend, or unfamiliar men alone at bars, or strangers parked by abandoned buildings. Some calls were fragments: a pickup racing down a gravel road, a man with a beard hanging around the Tom Thumb store, headlights in odd places after midnight. Police chased every tip, setting up roadblocks as far as neighboring counties, but most were dead ends. You'd get your hopes up, then it would fade, a deputy later remembered. It was like chasing fog, linking the past, the Painesville pattern. Then, from just 15 miles away in the town of Painesville, a crucial pattern began to emerge. A trembling mother called to relate a terrifying story. Her son, Chris, also around Jacob's age, had barely escaped an assault while biking at night in 1987. The man wore a mask, she told investigators. He told my son and his friend to drop their bikes, then forced them to lie in the weeds. He asked their ages, then let one run, just like with the Wetterling boy. The other one got away only by fighting back. Digging further, authorities learned of a series of attacks at least 8 boys between 1986 and 1988, all within a few blocks of each other. Survivors described the same type of assailant: heavyset, menacing, masked or hidden by dark clothing, always threatening violence, sometimes wielding a gun or knife. The attacks happened when it was dark, almost always when boys were alone or with just one friend. Miraculously, none had been kidnapped or killed, but the specter of Chester the Molester, as local children whispered, haunted the whole town. One of the Painesville survivors, interviewed that Wednesday at the St. Joseph command post, described his fear in detail. He told me, "Don't look at my face or I'll shoot. I just did what he said, ran, and never told anyone but my mom." The first suspects and the Rassier family. With echoes between the cases, police built a list of likely suspects: sex offenders in a 50-mile radius, men with criminal records, or anyone with odd behavior in the area lately. Interviewers went house to house. One farm, standing directly beside the abduction site, drew heavy scrutiny: the home of Dan Rassier and his elderly parents. Dan, a music teacher with a solitary reputation around town, had actually called 911 himself after seeing cars and flashlights in his driveway that night. Police questioned him closely. Where was he at 9 p.m.? Could his family prove it? Did he see or hear anything unusual before or after Jacob's disappearance? Dan was forthcoming, if obviously rattled, and allowed investigators full access to his home and barns. Though he passed an early polygraph test and received no official accusation, Dan quickly felt his life change. People whispered. The press, hungry for a villain to shape their stories, circled his land and documented each time an investigator paid a visit. Dan maintained his innocence unequivocally. "I wanted Jacob found as much as anyone," he later told a reporter, the exhaustion clear in his voice. "I still think about that night 10 times a day." But as days became weeks, the suspicion that fell on him and his family cast a long, toxic shadow. Investigative frustration mounts. It was not just the Rassiers under scrutiny. Cold Spring police reached out to St. Joseph with their own story. In January, just 9 months before, a 12-year-old boy named Jared had been kidnapped at gunpoint, sexually assaulted, then released by a suspect who left tire tracks and a boot print at the scene. Police retrieved biological evidence from Jared's clothing and saved it for analysis. The description, a stocky man, violent and threatening, in a car with a police scanner, whose voice had a forced authority, seemed frighteningly familiar. However, the workloads were crushing. Evidence was not sent in for DNA analysis, and this crucial link would languish in a file until technology caught up many years later. Investigators, backed by the FBI and state-level experts, pored over hundreds of out-of-town names, searching regional sexual offender registries and cross-checking anyone recently released from jail. FBI profilers suggested the abductor was likely an opportunistic predator living within 30 miles, intelligent, local, and with a cold, systematic streak. He might even have attended the Oktoberfest or watched the boys from afar before choosing his moment. But the leads, despite their apparent promise, failed to materialize into arrests. Public frustration became another torment. Journalists pressed for answers at daily conferences, and campaign-style posters with Jacob's picture multiplied across a suddenly vigilant Minnesota, a town in paralysis. For weeks, St. Joseph was frozen in grief and fear. Halloween approached, but kids stayed in, their pumpkins unlit. Parents looked twice at every stranger. Teachers kept eyes on the clock as students struggled to pay attention. The ordinary rituals of town life, ball games, school, picking up milk felt changed forever. And for the first time, parents taught their children about stranger danger with real urgent fear. If you drove through St. Joseph as November began, you'd see a sea of yellow ribbons around trees, Jacob's photo printed on every stop sign, and satellite trucks lining up on the edge of darkness. The national media had arrived. Minicam vans from Minneapolis, CNN correspondents, Good Morning America crews. Every local update became front-page news. Jacob's face, with its wide smile and sandy hair, stared back from newspapers, milk cartons, and television screens across the country. At first, the coverage brought hope. Patty and Jerry Wetterling, despite sleepless nights and the sickening unknown, became powerful spokespeople. Patty addressed the cameras. "If you have Jacob, just let him go. He's just a boy. He doesn't deserve any of this." Her voice quivered but never faltered, and Americans by the millions saw a mother's courage burning through grief. They held press conferences daily. Sometimes it was just to repeat a plea, asking whoever took Jacob to show mercy. Other times, surrounded by stacks of missing child flyers, they thanked searchers and the community. They kept the search alive through the cold, persistent days that followed. Escalating investigation. The investigation ballooned beyond Stearns County. The FBI, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and other state agencies arrived, bringing forensic scientists, profilers, and criminal analysts into a huge cross-jurisdictional effort. Teams coordinated hundreds of volunteers and began knocking on every door for miles. Inspired partly by national attention, the police created a dedicated phone bank, logging every call, every tip, every possible lead. "I took a call from a woman convinced she'd seen Jacob in a Cadillac in Iowa," one investigator later remembered. "We checked every single car like that in 3 counties. It wasn't him, but you had to look." Helicopters buzzed up and down the Sauk River and open farmland. Boats dragged ponds and quarries. Dog teams, flown in from other states, scoured woods, cornfields, and old storm cellars. Detectives even checked culverts, irrigation pipes, and covered wells. The search radius eventually stretched out to 50 miles. A family under siege. Inside their now famous home, the Wetterlings lived a kind of nightmare. Friends, extended family, and searchers filled the kitchen. Casseroles arrived by the dozen, and neighbors dropped off food, clothing, and sometimes poems, candles, or rosaries. People brought leads in person, pressing Patty's hands and whispering, "We're praying. He's coming home. I just know it." But nights were harder. Jerry barely slept, haunted by images he couldn't shake. Patty scoured every news segment, tracking theories and false leads with hope teetering between faith and desperation. "We'd stare at his favorite chair or his books at the breakfast table," she later wrote. Everything was waiting for him. Not wanting their pain to be in vain, the Wetterlings spoke out against the dangers of stranger abduction, warning other families, pushing for resources and awareness. Before Jacob, the concept of stranger danger felt theoretical to most Americans. Now it was nightly news, a dread as real as the evening sunset. Tip lines explode, theories spiral. Some leads were chilling. An anonymous caller described a neighbor who'd built a sudden suspicious backyard fire pit. A boy in a distant county claimed to have seen Jacob tied up in a van. Rural teenagers reported bumps in the night and hidden camps in the woods. Police investigated each claim in turn, turning up bitter dead ends, hoping against reality that the break would finally come. Others delivered only frustration. False confessions, some from mentally unstable individuals, others from desperate publicity seekers, wasted manpower. A few even deliberately misled police with elaborate fictitious stories, leaving investigators juggling hope and skepticism. Jittery parents called, sometimes at 2 a.m, convinced they saw the abductor's face in a store aisle, or that their child was being stalked. The flood of calls never ceased, and as yet, every lead ended at a wall. Profiling theories and the manhunt. The FBI's criminal profile suggested the abductor was likely a local, someone with knowledge of the area and of when children would be alone. They theorized he'd stalked his victims and prepared a planned escape, a belief strengthened by the organization and precision evident at the crime scene. But there was also the suggestion, darker and harder to hear, that this might be a repeat offender, and that Jacob may not have been the first target. This possibility restoked the Painesville rumors and caused the media to dig up every unsolved attack in a 100-mile radius. The town became relentless in its conversation about outsiders and the evil among us. Winter closes in. As the first snow blanketed St. Joseph in early December, hope flickered. The search effort, though no less rigorous, grew more pained. The rivers and lakes froze. Fields lay under drifts thick enough to erase footprints for months. Daily search parties dwindled, but a hard core of volunteers kept combing barns, snowmobile trails, and even half-frozen creeks, refusing to abandon hope well into the new year. The Wetterlings decorated for Christmas, leaving Jacob's stocking above the mantel and his gifts wrapped, waiting. The community attended special masses and prayer vigils. On December 25th, Patty placed a lighted angel in the window to guide Jacob home. It shone through snow and blackness all winter long. Winter in St. Joseph was always cold, but in the aftermath of Jacob's abduction, every snowstorm felt colder, every snowfall heavier. Searchers pressed on through January's sub-zero winds, frozen hands gripping flashlights, 6-hour shifts combing through abandoned barns, culverts, and forests buried beneath silent white. The hope of finding Jacob alive had begun, quietly, agonizingly, to recede. Yet the Wetterlings refused to close their doors to hope. They posted missing child posters on every telephone pole for miles. Even as the tips faded, the posters tattered and fell. The faces drove home just how many children were still missing in America. The world moved forward, but the Wetterlings and all of St. Joseph remained frozen in that October night. The toll on family and town. Trevor, once the lively little brother, was overwhelmed by guilt and confusion. His schoolwork suffered, nightmares stalked his sleep. Aaron, to whom Jacob had been both best friend and almost brother, drifted into silence, the trauma driving a wedge between him and classmates who could not comprehend. Patty and Jerry saw their marriage strain beneath the pressure. Some nights, grief pulled them together. Other nights, the pain was too much to share. For the wider community, the case became a murky lens through which everything was now viewed. New neighbors were regarded with suspicion. Kids never biked alone. Summer sleepovers, once cherished rites of passage, became rare, and play was always chaperoned. The town that had once prided itself on its innocence now spoke of locked doors and curfews. And there was another shadow, Dan Racia's ordeal. Throughout that grim winter, and for years after, investigative attention remained focused on Dan, the music teacher whose family farm sat adjacent to the abduction site. His quiet routines and solitary hobbies, weekend jogs, collecting records, practicing alone in the barn, quickly became suspicious eccentricities in the public's eye. Over and over, Dan allowed police to search every outbuilding, every closet, every tool shed. He volunteered for hypnosis to recall everything from that night. He handed over mud-caked shoes for analysis, submitted to polygraph after polygraph. Still, the rumor mill ground on. Reporters began parking at the edge of his property. Townspeople whispered at the post office, and students at the school where he taught asked careful, frightened questions. Despite zero evidence, no DNA, no fiber, no confession, the odd man at the edge of town became the target of both official scrutiny and community suspicion for decades. Years later, Dan would describe the era as enduring someone else's nightmare while living your own. Even after police quietly admitted they had found nothing linking him to any crime, the whispers persisted. The case grows cold and lingers. By the early 1990s, police files on the Wetterling case filled box after box. There were thousands of reports, tips from dozens of states, interviews with sex offenders, interrogations of drifters, and stacks of evidence logs. Yet none of the clues panned out. Leads would flare briefly, a boy spotted by a waitress in Utah, taillights down a back road in Canada, but always collapsed. Each anniversary, the media circled back. Jacob Wetterling, still missing. On the first anniversary, Patty spoke to a crowd through candlelight, her strength unwavering. We still have hope. We must. Yet after each vigil, news crews left. The town returned to its new routine of fear, and the Wetterlings quietly marked another year of absence. The Cold Spring connection, the abduction and assault of Jared, the 12-year-old left alive by a similarly described attacker, remained unproven by hard evidence. Though both boys had been snatched near home by a heavy-set man with a mask and a gun, and biological evidence had been obtained from Jared's clothing, the DNA technology of the early 1990s was primitive, and soon, the crime lab was overwhelmed with new cases. Samples from Jared's case went untested, filed away and almost forgotten. A national legacy, the Wetterlings' advocacy. Even as their own case languished in unsolved files, the Wetterlings devoted themselves to protecting other families. Patty and Jerry campaigned for alert systems, for missing child protocols, for improved law enforcement communication across state lines. They pressed for the creation of the Jacob Wetterling Act, bringing Megan's Law and the Amber Alert system into being and saving untold lives through prevention and rapid response networks. Theirs was a sacrifice no family should have to make. Private pain repeatedly made public, each television appearance a reminder of their own loss. But the Wetterlings continued, transformed by grief but burning with purpose. In every speech, Patty said, "Jacob is out there, and every missing child is Jacob." A cold case. Shifts, new evidence, new momentum. Years turned to decades. The room reserved for Jacob remained untouched, a shrine to boyhood, growing more out of date with every year. In 2010, a strange new momentum arrived. As part of a national push to solve unsolved abductions, investigators combed through every file: Painesville assaults, the Cold Spring attack, overlooked tips suggesting a blue car near the scene, a man seen by the river, rumors from the next county. An FBI specialist revisited the tire track evidence, linking it to cars registered in Stearns County in 1989. That year, police without new evidence brought a 100-person search team, news vans, and even K-9 units to the Rossier farm, in a display of force so public that Dan's reputation suffered anew. Dug up flower beds, GPS mapping, and farm equipment were all searched and seized. Yet again, nothing. Meanwhile, new investigators, reviewing the collected files, noticed a long-ignored name, Danny Heinrich. His file included mention of earlier polygraphs, partial matches to tire treads and footprints, but no follow-up. Presumably, the lack of DNA technology and the overwhelming flood of tips had allowed his file to slide to the bottom of the stack. But now, in an era where DNA could be extracted from the smallest particle, the time had come to take another look. Breakthrough. The power of DNA. In 2015, decades after the world seemed to move on, investigators tested the preserved biological evidence from Jared's Cold Spring case, finally running it against the state's digitized offender database. The result, a perfect match. DNA didn't lie. The man that had attacked Jared, the boy who survived, was Danny Heinrich, a resident of Painesville, and, at the time of the attack, a young man who'd previously been questioned but never arrested. When they knocked on his door, officers stated their purpose plainly. Heinrich, soft-voiced and balding now, protested. His voice quivered. "I don't know anything about Jacob Wetterling." But police now had enough to act. In a search of his home, they found the evidence of years spent as a predator. Binders of child pornography, stacks of homemade photos, and external drives loaded with images and videos, years' worth collected and archived. The scale was staggering and inescapable. A deal for the truth and an unbearable confession. At last, the truth was within arm's reach. Prosecutors, desperate for closure for the Wetterlings, made Heinrich an offer. If he confessed to Jacob's abduction and murder, revealed where he'd laid the body, and described every detail, they would not charge him for murder due to statute of limitations complications, but would secure a 20-year federal sentence for child pornography, the maximum allowable. Heinrich agreed. The confessions came in bitter details. On that October night, after seeing Jacob and his friends at the Tom Thumb, Heinrich had driven around the little town, waiting for the opportunity to strike. He parked at the Rassier driveway, put on a homemade mask, and waited in the shadows. When he saw the boys return, he emerged, forced two to run, then handcuffed Jacob and put him in the car. As with Jared, he told Jacob he'd shoot him if he didn't comply. Heinrich described driving Jacob north to a remote gravel pit outside Painesville. There, armed and listening for police on a scanner, he sexually assaulted him. When headlights flashed from the road above, Heinrich panicked. He told Jacob to turn around, aimed a gun, and on the second trigger pull-shot him. With chilling calm, he dug a shallow grave, covered the child's body, and left. When a piece of the grave, Jacob's red jacket, surfaced months later, Heinrich returned, moved the remains, and reburied Jacob on a different farm. The end and the aftermath. On September 1, 2016, after 27 years of waiting, police recovered Jacob's remains at the location Heinrich described. The red jacket, bone fragments, and a jersey still bearing Jacob's name were all there. DNA testing soon confirmed the terrible truth. Heinrich stood before a judge and confessed, his eyes rarely meeting anyone else's. Even as Patty and Jerry listened, grieving aloud in the courtroom, Patty gripped her husband's hand, weeping for her boy, but also for decades lost to uncertainty. Danny Heinrich was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for child pornography. It wasn't and never could be equal to the weight of his crimes. He will be eligible for release when he is an old man, but the records will forever brand him for what he is: a legacy in sorrow and resolve. The Wetterling family, while shattered, brought a message of perseverance to the nation. Jacob taught us love. Every child deserves to be safe. We have work left to do, Patty told the world, standing in the autumn light, voice fierce with defiant peace. For St. Joseph, and for millions who watched their town transform, the case was a lesson learned at the highest, most personal cost of vigilance, courage, and the refusal to let darkness have the last word. So that was today's story. If you want to see more gripping crime mysteries, don't forget to like this video, share it with your fellow mystery lovers, and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a new case. Got a story or case you want me to cover? Drop it in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.